So 3 words that summarize most of what we teach are big to small. It's a really commonly used phrase when teaching art, and for a good reason. It really summarizes everything, whether it's portraits, whether it's figures, how do you spell small, not like that, whether it's landscapes, big to small. So I'm going to show you this principle, and it goes a bit deeper than you might realize, and we're going to resolve lots of things, right? Whether it's about proportions, whether it's about shading, whether it's about creating a really good face, a gesture. All of these things are going to come back to always thinking big to small. Now, I really like when you have something very simple you can keep in your head, because I can't keep complicated things in my head. So we're going to start, and I just noticed this lady is actually crying, which makes me feel quite sad to look at her. I hope she's okay. But anyway, we'll try and draw her portrait, all right? So the first big idea is, what direction is this head looking in? And so often I think people with with the Loomis and all that, they'll really obsess about like, oh, how much do you chop off the sides, and what's this thing with the thirds and all this kind of stuff. To me, the useful part of the Loomis is the axis lines, and that's because they're going to help us determine which direction this face is looking in, whether it's up or down or sideways, in the easiest way possible. They're the simplest 2 lines that can do that. The underlying ball shape, you know what? I could have done it with it. I could have done it with any kind of shape. So just thinking about a random shape, like I sometimes do it with like when I'm explaining this, I'll do it with like a sort of mug, and we can put axis lines on this, like a cup of tea or something. These are bad axis lines. The axis lines themselves are what really matters, and then you can build up the face onto this. And I guess the point is, it doesn't really matter what the initial form is. So I wouldn't obsess too much about that. I would really focus on these axis lines and getting good at facing them in different directions, right? So if you've got a head looking up and to the side, get good at making these axis lines look up and to the side. These are the big, simple ideas of this face that we're starting with. All right. Now, in order to sort of capture this person's face and head, we want to throw down a really simple initial head form that kind of reflects her head form. And so what I'm talking about is sort of starting to put in what her jaw and chin and stuff actually look like. As I do this, I want to follow the big to small principle. I've started with the biggest, simplest idea, which way is the head facing. Now I'm moving to the shape of the head. I want to do it in the biggest and simplest terms possible. So I think that her head, if you look on the reference here, goes 1, 2, 3, 4, like this. These are the sort of lines, and then along the jaw and like this. The thing about big to small is that your brain will constantly pull you towards the small. It does not like big to small. I don't know why, but we're programmed with software that is like anti-art. So we have to install new software, right? So when you're looking at what I often see people doing with the face is like they'll kind of pull things in, pull things out, do this, kind of, this is an exaggeration, but kind of overdo what's happening in the outline. But maybe there is a little bit of a rounding here. Maybe there is some nuance, around the chin and stuff like that. We don't want to put that in because those are small ideas. What's the big idea? A big line. So what I mean is that the big to small principle even applies to each line, to each outline. It's like the small idea is, the cheek kind of comes out a little bit here and then things come down and there's some small ideas. But what's just the big idea is just this. Very big, very simple idea. And if you can let go of all these little nuances that you see and focus on the big idea first, it's going to be really, really helpful. All right. So now in terms of the proportion, one thing I like to do is just kind of imagine the ear, because I know it's kind of under the hair here, but if I imagine the ear, then I like to place that because the ear is a useful landmark. What I can then do is think about the proportions of this person's face. Again, when I'm thinking proportions, I want to go big to small. I don't want to start measuring small things, I want to measure big things. And we're going to do this on figures, we're going to do this on whatever. So if I think about the width across her face, like from the cheek to the front of the ear, say, and then I go from the eyebrow down to the chin. For me, this is my favorite comparison. It's just basically the height of the face from chin to the eyebrows, and then across the face. And I'm going to try and see how those lengths measure up. So I hold up my pencil, and I pull it across, and I think it's similar, and often it is similar. And how about on mine? You know, is this distance here similar to this distance here? So I'm going to hold up my pencil like this. I put my finger on that distance, and I compare it, and it seems all right. Maybe the chin needs to come down a little bit, because I think the height of mine seems like it's a little bit short. So maybe the chin needs to come down to about here. What's going on? Like this. Another thing that I want to check is these big angles. So I've summarized her sort of jaw and chin and everything with a few big simple angles, but are these the right angles? So I'll just, are these correct? Like this one here is different to this one here. These are really big, basic, simple ideas, but I need to get these right, and I need to take time to get these big ideas right. I don't want to spend, loads of time fiddling about with details if these big things are wrong. And so when I'm looking at sort of students' drawings and stuff like that, it's usually a really big, simple thing that might have happened in the first 30 seconds that needs adjusting, rather than going, oh, it's about this little minute detail that you spent 20 minutes on. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit more time at this stage, and a little bit, you can spend as long as you like on the details, but we really don't want to sort of rush this stage of things where we're trying to just capture the big, simple idea. So one thing that I think maybe even that I do in these videos is kind of brush past this or time lapse it or make it look fast. Not, because often in a time lapse you don't quite realize how long someone has spent just on this initial stage of trying to get these ideas in about the right places. Okay, so I'm happy with the length versus the width. I'm happy that it's facing in the right direction. So the biggest and simplest ideas of this head, I'm okay with right now. For right now, right? Okay, so what else could I do that is big picture? Am I now going to go, okay, cool, I've done my big stuff, so I'm just going to start drawing the eyes? No, those are small ideas. Those are really small ideas. Nostrils, small. Lips, small. Eyelashes, small. And we're going big to small. Big to small is a whole hierarchy. We have just done the biggest. We're going to do the next biggest thing, and then we'll do the medium, and then we'll do sort of the medium small, and then we'll do the small stuff, all right? So what is the next thing? The next thing is, where is the base of the nose? Not drawing the nose, but like how far down does the nose come relative to the eyebrows? So I'm going to check this distance here, like this, and I'll pull it down. I go, you know what? It's a little bit further than halfway. I feel like if the average person's nose is halfway down, hers is a little bit beyond halfway. Okay, so how about that? So I'll check this now. I've put it down, but I'm going to check it. That is actually exactly on halfway, so that's not far enough. So I'm going to put mine just a little bit lower than that, like this. And then maybe that's going to be about right. Okay, so I've placed a big idea now. Then I'm going to put the opening of the mouth. I'm not drawing the actual mouth. I'm just trying to place it by placing this line here. So where's that going to be? I think it's about a third. Let me check. About a third of the way, maybe just a bit over a third of the way from the base of the nose down to the chin. So what is another really, I'm thinking, resist that temptation for details. I don't want to do the eyes, but I could think about how the eye sockets are kind of set into the head like this, like it's kind of recessed into the head. So I could just put in some lines to almost notes to myself to remind myself that this is not like this, it's not flat, it goes down, in, and then comes forward again. So I can also just put in like the line across the eyes. You know, like I put a line across the base of the nose, I could put a line across the eyes. I'm trying to go big to small, and these are really big, simple ideas like forget the eyes, what's the line across the eyes? I want to make sure that these lines across the nose, across the mouth, across the eyes are making sense with my center line as well. They should be basically going at right angles to those. Okay, then is it time for the eyes? No, it's time for the eyeballs. That's like a medium-sized idea. And the eyelids and the eyelashes and the irises and all that kind of stuff, those are small ideas. Now, at this point, I may well be getting things wrong. I feel like I've got the nose a bit too long here. But we're going to keep going with it. We can always adjust it later on. I may need to pull these eyeballs down a little bit, possibly. I don't know. But I don't want to move on to small ideas until I'm really confident about these ideas. You're never going to fix stuff by adding smaller ideas. It's got to work at the big level, and if the big level looks all right, then we can go to the medium level, and if the medium level's all right, we can go to the small level. Okay, so now if I think about her cheeks, right, these forms of her cheeks, this is a pretty big idea, definitely not a small detail, the cheeks, right? So if I think about these forms, I like to summarize these with, all right, there's this sort of bulging shape here and a bulging shape here, and we can connect them. The thing that's great about connecting them is we go from two sort of smaller ideas to one big idea, one big rhythm line that goes right across the face, and now we're connecting these forms across the face. So it really, the bigger I can make the idea, the better, because we're going big to small. So I'm going to try and make these cheeks, the bottom, the line along the bottom of this plane of this form of the cheeks, into one idea here. I've also got a big, really big, simple idea, which is, where is the front of the face turning and becoming the side of the face? Right, like along the chin, and it kind of does it along this line here. So right now we're using some big, simple rhythm lines, and some of these are taken from Riley rhythms, is the name of them. And for me, what I like to then think about is, where's the top of this cheek form running? This kind of rounded cheek form, and it runs like this, something like this. So these are right, trying to think about big, simple forms of the head and face. Remember, we started with like a simple ball, didn't have to be a ball, with axis lines. Then we started to sculpt the overall head shape. Then now we've jammed some eyeballs in there. Now we're thinking about the cheek forms. Still no lips, no nostrils, no eyelashes, none of that stuff. Not allowed, okay, because it's too small. The ideas are too small. I might put in the overall shape of the hair right now. And even with the hair, like obviously there's tiny strands in the hair. And there's even like, even if I go one size bigger than the strands, there's like little details in this outline, right? There's all these little details in this outline. But for now, I want to go big to small means, what does that mean? It just means like, what's the overall sort of shape of this hair? in big, simple terms, right? Not thinking about the small ideas, but just the overall shape of it. Where is it? If I can get the size of this shape, how far out does it come? I want to figure these big ideas out before I start worrying about the details of the strands. All right, so I'm going to use big, simple lines here to sort of summarize this shape of hair. All right, so then I can think about the neck. Where does the neck come out from behind the chin? And where does it come out from behind the jaw on the back? And then just like, what's the angle of it? So I'm really using big, simple lines to capture big, simple ideas. She doesn't have a nose, she doesn't have lips yet, because those ideas are too small. All right, I'll try and flip it horizontally, see if I'm reasonably happy. Okay, so one thing I could do then is I could think about the nose without doing the details of the nose. So I'll actually do this on a new layer to make it a bit clearer, but I've got the simplified base of the nose, and then there's the tip of the nose. So I connect those to make a sort of bottom plane for the nose. I've got this keystone shape, which is the shape here between the eyebrows, a sort of trapezoidal shape, right? And I can connect that to the tip of the nose. Then maybe give the nose a side plane to just make a simple wedge shape of the nose. If I'm thinking big to small, if I'm like a sculptor and I've got a lump of clay, I've gone for this big head shape clay, stuck eyeballs into it, started to form the overall cheeks. Now I'm just sticking a simple wedge shape on for the nose. And then I can mold into that later, but I'm trying to think big to small. And the simplest, biggest idea for the nose is like this. And I know it looks pretty crude, but I think that's okay. So am I now going to put in lips and nostrils and stuff? No, I want to think, if I look at the mouth, yes, there's lips. But what I really want to do is think about the underlying ball shape here, underneath the mouth, okay? And in the chin, this kind of ball shape. These ideas are bigger than the specifics of the lips and all of that kind of stuff. So I can put this kind of ball shape that goes underneath the mouth. Later, I'll wrap the lips over that ball shape, all right? But I've got this kind of ball shape that kind of goes underneath the mouth and then a ball shape in the chin. Okay, good. So now I'm going to think about the values, right? So we thought we were getting to the eyelashes and whatnot, way too small. So we're thinking about values now. And what's the biggest, simplest idea in terms of the values, the dark or the shadow? Well, it corresponds to the big, simple form, which was just the kind of simple egg-shaped head. And like one side of that head is facing away from the light, and it's that side, you know, and then the rest is basically catching light. You know, if I really wanted to get into it, I could be sort of more nuanced, like, this, you know, the light falls off and there's a gradient and all this kind of stuff. But that is too small of an idea. I'm just thinking like basically that side of the head is not phasing the light, and then the rest of it is catching some light. And I know that there's lots of detail inside of that, but I'm going big to small. It's the biggest, simplest idea. So the mantra is big to small. So the nose, underneath the nose is facing down, so I'm just going to put that into the dark as well, right? Because it's facing away from the light. And then like this side of the nose is also, this nose wedge shape is casting a shadow over that ball under the mouth and across the cheek, right? So it's really simple like wedge shape, and it's just casting a shadow. It's like a sculpture of sculpting big to small. I haven't finished. And then now I'm lighting it with shadows. And it's like, well, she doesn't even have lips or eyes. But I'm just going to do the values, the light and dark, as if she doesn't have eyes, okay? So this is how the big to small idea works. That there's that eye lit as if it's just an eyeball, not an actual got any eyelids or iris or anything like that. I've got the eye socket, that's a big idea, so there's shadow inside the eye socket. and then there's a bit of shadow across the ball, right? So if I've got like a ball and light's coming from here, there'll be shadow here, right? It's kind of like the moon or something, right? And then it's going to cast a shadow as well. I'm thinking that simply right now, and then in terms of these forms in that such simple terms. So when I get to the other eye, I'm not looking at the eye, I'm just thinking, well, this side of the ball is in shadow. The hair, and actually a little bit of the eyebrow, because it's got black eyebrows, are going to be in the dark. The hair is casting a shadow, like this. It's also going to cast a shadow across the neck. Trying to simplify these ideas. The neck is basically a cylinder where this side of the cylinder is facing away from the light. So it goes into the shadow. And then around the mouth, there's this ball shape. Again, I'm going to have shadow on one part of that ball. And also the chin is kind of like a ball shape. And so this part's going to go into the shadow like this, like that. All right. And so maybe one thing I could do is like the background is dark. So I could put the background into the dark. That seems like a big, simple idea. And I'm going big to small. Whoops, I'm going to have to fix that in a second. But I'll go like this. And kind of messed something up on the chin. So let me come and fix that. Okay. So I've got like a really simple version now of this face, of this head. So I can spend more time refining this. So like this part of this shape, if I look, I feel like it's more of a straight line like that. So I could do that. I could come in and just try and get that shape looking more like that. You know, and I can make all of these simple shapes just a little bit simpler and actually reflect what's happening in this reference just a little bit better without adding any complication. Like I can keep it this simple and this simplified, not add any kind of complication to it, and just refine this simple two values, light and dark, really simple shapes. I am actually adding a little bit of information here, aren't I? So this is a bad temptation, starting to add details. But I want to keep it really, really simple. One thing I can even do at this stage is I could start to soften some of the edges where it's a form shadow, where it's just the forms turning away from the light. So if it's like where the nose, wedge-shaped nose is casting a shadow, a cast shadow, I'll keep the edge sharp. So that's like this edge and this edge. And where it's just the forms slowly turning away from the light, like on the cheeks and on the eyeballs and the mouth ball and the chin and all that, I could soften those edges if I want to. Because often those edges are softer, and then the cast shadow edges and the outlines are a bit sharper. And so I'm really starting to build up this face, and there's no small ideas really, right? There's no, the nuances of the nose, the nostrils, the actual eyes aren't there. And this is me trying to keep it big to small. And this is such a fantastic exercise for your portraits. Now I could keep going with this, and I could start to, try and bring in some smaller ideas around, the lips, etc., and all this kind of stuff. But I don't want to do that now because we've gone big to medium. You could then start to bring in the small ideas. So to summarize, big to small, 3 words. All right, I've got another video up on the screen about how to practice this kind of thing. It really guides you through the whole process for figures. I've got one for figures and I've got one for portraits. So check out these exercises, they're so powerful. I hope that this was helpful, and if you remember one thing today, it's maybe you already knew it, but now a renewed focus on big to small.